Good afternoon and Happy New Year. Today, January 11th, marks the first of the Q&A webinars for calendar year 2023. I would just like to welcome everybody and say we've got a lot of things planned this year, so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions, and I look forward to today's Q&A session and future Q&A sessions. With that, let's go ahead and jump right into the questions.
All right. Hi, Jason. Our first question comes from Ryan C. And he asks, am I currently able to apply for a license that now that I have been verified as a social equity applicant?
So the answer to that would be yes. You're going to have to make some business decisions in terms of whether or not you're going to pursue a license as a sole proprietor, or if you're going to create a legal entity to pursue the license opportunity. If you create the legal entity, you will, of course, need to have a legal business entity record number where you're going to tell DCR what business it is, what the BTRC number, and all of the information related to the business in order for you to submit an application for a commercial cannabis activity. But at this time, you do have the ability to apply for non-storefront delivery or any of the other non-retail activities that are currently available on the website.
Okay, thanks. The next question comes from Ruth A. In the most recent DCR bulletin, DCR announced that it had suggested to sunset out 2019 verified applicants. Why was this suggestion made, and where does this recommendation stand?
So the recommendation was made because, for all intents and purposes, the 2019 social equity individual applicant criteria is no longer in effect. It applied to the applicants that applied as part of phase 2 who submitted applications in 2018. It applied to folks who applied during the filing period in 2019. And then, of course, the criteria applied to phase 3 retail round 1. Since then, the council has adopted the expanded criteria, which of course was a prerequisite to participate in the phase 3 retail round 2 lottery in future lotteries. So for the activities that are limited to social equity applicants, at this time, the applicant entity is going to have at least a 51% equity stake from verified social equity individual applicants, and they're going to have to meet the newer criteria. So really, it's just making it clear to folks that the criteria from 2019 is no longer in use based on the Los Angeles Municipal Code, and it's really clean up. That recommendation was not adopted by the Los Angeles City Council. It's still pending before the Planning and Land Use Management Committee. However, as we do accept new applications in, folks are going to have to meet the 51% equity share requirement for all new applications, which effectively eliminates the tier 2 component, which allowed for folks to only have the 33 1/3%.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Ryan C. is asking, what are the advantages of being in the social equity program with DCR as opposed to not being an social equity individual applicant?
I think the biggest benefit of being a verified social equity individual applicant is the access to the business licensing and compliance assistance, including the learning management system, pro bono legal services, and other programs administered by Dr. Brown and the social equity team. As a verified social equity individual applicant, there may also be opportunities for you to apply for grant funding through the department that the state has been providing the city for social equity programming. And then, of course, social equity individual applicants have the ability to apply for retail storefront activities, cultivation, and non-storefront delivery through December 31st, 2024, when In 2025, general applicants are going to be able to apply for those activities or submit public convenience or necessity requests. So the biggest advantage, of course, is the access to the business licensing and compliance assistance, which includes the LMS pro bono legal services, and then potentially the ability to tap into some of the grant funding for fee deferrals or fee waivers, depending on what's available at the time.
Perfect, thanks. Benjamin L. asks, is there any transitional licenses that can be issued while waiting for the licensing process to be complete?
So the city currently has the authority to issue temporary approval, which is a form of temporary licensure. While if you receive your temporary approval, then that allows for you to potentially engage in commercial cannabis activity while you pursue your annual license. The state is phasing out their provisional licensure program, and because of the dual licensing requirement, once the state phases out their provisional licenses, temporary approval at the local level really has no effect because you won't be able to operate until you get your annual state license, which requires you to also get your annual city license.
Okay, thanks. Our next question came from several people. I'll mention them now. Mike A, Orlando H, Ron S, Demetria C, Nick S, Michael C, and Fabio F. The Phase 3 Retail Round 2 lottery was held on December 8th of 2022. Is DCR planning to do another lottery? If so, when? Approximate date, year, for example.
So DCR has had a few challenges to the social equity program criteria, one of which we were able to overcome last December in advance of the Phase 3 Retail Round 2 lottery. The department will be making a recommendation to the City Council to strengthen the social equity criteria and hopefully prevent future legal challenges which could disrupt the administration of future lotteries. So we plan to get those recommendations out earlier this year. And if adopted, then we could potentially administer another lottery this calendar year. But at this time, there are no proximate dates of when we would hold a future lottery or what criteria would be utilized for the administration of that lottery.
Okay, the next questions comes from a couple of individuals, Mike A and Orlando H. Will SEIA criteria be the same as it was during Phase 3 Retail Round 2 lottery if there is an additional lottery this year?
Again, DCR will be making a recommendation to amend the SEIA criteria to eliminate some of the criteria that have been previously challenged, and we'll see where the City Council and the mayor land on that particular issue.
Okay, the next question from Ron S. Should I set up a corporation before applying for the license, or can I set it up during the application process?
If you plan to pursue a commercial cannabis application as a corporation, you're going to need to establish the corporation and then make sure that you have all of the necessary filings in order to submit your legal business entity record. When you start the pre-application review process, you'll identify whether or not you're going to pursue that license opportunity as a sole proprietor or as a legal entity. And if you are pursuing it as a legal entity, such as a corporation, you'll be asked to provide your legal business entity record number. So in most circumstances, you'll have to set the corporation up before you submit your temporary approval or annual application to the department.
Okay, the next question comes from Jim T. For public health inspections, what are they looking for?
So this particular question could be a webinar in and of itself. I would refer you to the department's website for more detailed information as it relates to the criteria. Um, I think somebody from our team can go ahead and drop a link to the relevant section. But in general, they're looking for hot and cold water available at essential sinks, toilets available, approved water heater with adequate rating and drainage, a cannabis waste area, and making sure that those cannabis waste containers are secured. The building is free of vermin. Those are some of the general things that they're looking for. Um, Through the link that our team provides, it'll have more information directly from the Department of Public Health. And then, of course, you can reach out to them for more detailed information related to their process.
Thanks, Jason. Daryl C asks, what type of license can I apply for that does not require me to have a physical building location?
So all commercial cannabis activities require the applicant to have a proposed business premises so that we can do the land use review for that particular location. Because we have a discretionary licensure process, we do have to do the environmental review. And one of the most critical things for that review is the actual location where the commercial cannabis activity would occur. Things that you can do in advance of securing a location or submitting an application would be to create your legal business entity record. If you're going to pursue it as a social equity applicant, you can go through the equity share review. Those are the types of things that you can do without having a proposed location. Of course, once you are ready to move forward, you have the ability to submit a pre-application review record with the landowner attestation form, which does not require you to have formal site control, an executed lease, property deed, et cetera. And if we determine that the proposed business premises location could be eligible for licensure for your selected activities, then you have up to 1 year to submit your application to the department, at which point you would have peace of mind that you could move forward and pursue those commercial cannabis activities at that location, and you could then execute a lease or purchase the property and then submit your application. Once you do submit your application, though, you will have to have site control and provide proof of site control to have a complete application.
Okay. Daryl C is asking, if I'm a verified social equity applicant, can I receive free or pro bono legal services to gain assistance in obtaining my license?
I recommend reaching out to the social equity team, dcr.sep@lacity.org with your information, so that they can review to verify that you're eligible for the program, you have been verified, and then what opportunities are available to you and who you would contact if you are eligible to pursue those services.
Okay, our next question comes from Jesse F. If I am a sole proprietor, sorry about that, can I skip the legal entity business verification process and jump to the pre-application review?
Yes. So if you're a sole proprietor, when you log in to submit your pre-application review record, once you've selected sole proprietorship from the drop-down menu, the field to enter the legal business entity record number goes away, and then you have the ability to continue on through the pre-application review process.
Okay. Sam A is asking, the Office of Finance has not cashed a temporary approval check they received on December 1st. What do we do?
If you've already reached out to the Office of Finance directly, I would recommend you send an email to dcrlicensing@lacity.org so that our team can follow up with them. And then any, of course, information that you can provide in terms of tracking numbers, what the record number it was associated with, the type of payment submitted, whether it was a business check, a money order, or a cashier's check, would be helpful. And then our team can go ahead and follow with finance to see whether or not they have the payment and then they're just waiting to process it, or whether or not it hasn't reached their mail room from the centralized City Hall mail room.
Okay, and there's a follow-up question from Sam A. The Office of Finance couldn't schedule an appointment prior to an invoice expiring for temporary approval. How do we get a new invoice?
So it depends on the circumstance. So the Office of Finance has the ability to schedule payment appointments after the payment date listed on the invoice, provided the appointment was requested at least 10 business days prior to the expiration of the invoice. If you allowed the invoice to expire and you didn't timely request an appointment slot, your record may be subject to abandonment. It really depends on what the service was, and whether or not, if that service was deemed abandoned, you could just go ahead and re-request the service. And that's really a record by record review based on the circumstances of the record and what that service was.
The next two questions that we have to do with state licensing deadlines. The first one is from Tiana W., Nick S., and Jesse F. Has the state extended its provisional retail licensing period, and how will this affect the new 100 selected lottery winners?
The state has not extended its provisional retail licensing period. Folks have until March 31st, 2023, which is several weeks away, to submit a new request for a provisional license. Similar to the city's requirement, you're going to have a proposed business premises location to submit your application. If you do not submit your application by the state's deadline, unfortunately, you will not be eligible for provisional licensure through the state unless a future change is made to state law. Ultimately, for folks that are unable to get a provisional license, really, whether or not you get temporary approval from the city, you're not going to be able to operate until you have the corresponding state license. So the reality is, for the folks that were selected through the round 2 lottery, if you don't get a provisional license from the state, you're going to have to get a city annual license and a state annual license before you'll be able to operate your business.
Okay, and then the following question again about state licensing from Laura D. What's the plan if the state doesn't change the permanent licensing hard stop in June? And will any of us from any phase be able to get our permanent license?
So if the state doesn't change their regulations, and currently general applicants are no longer eligible to request a provisional license from the state. There was a small carve out made for social equity applicants that got an extended deadline. The deadline to submit the application to DCC, the Department of Cannabis Control, is March 31st, 2023. And their statute allows for them to continue to issue new provisional licenses through June 30th of 2023. If the law is not updated or amended in any way, the practical reality is folks will have to get a city annual license before you can meet the requirements for an annual state license. DCR did submit a report to the city council last year recommending the creation of a standalone annual application process, and that recommendation is still pending with the Planning and Land Use Management Committee. To the extent that those recommendations get moved out of committee, there would be a mechanism for us to effectuate a more streamlined application process with the hopes of allowing people to get to annual licensure sooner than they would otherwise be able to get to it based on their current code. But again, both of those things require future legislative actions that DCR does not have direct control over.
Okay, a question from Eric H. Unfortunately, my landlord wants us to move out. We are a type 9 business. What is this process like? Can I still serve my customers while in the process of moving?
Licensees have the ability to relocate their license. If you're relocating the license within the same community plan area, you could just go ahead and submit a business premises modification request or relocation request, depending on what type of change you have to make based on your agreements with the landlord. If you're able to engage in commercial cannabis activity, you still have site control, then you can still serve customers from your licensed location. If you no longer have site control, you are required to notify the department as well as cease commercial cannabis activity. You can't move your license from your licensed location to your home, for instance, and then, store product in your garage and deliver from your garage. That would not be allowed under local law. If you are looking for a location outside of your existing community plan area, it may be more effective for you to go ahead and just submit a new pre-application review record and then go through that process and then move through the licensing process there. But it really comes down to your ability to engage and whether or not you still have site control to engage in commercial cannabis activity at your licensed location.
Okay, we have an additional question from Eric H. Excuse me. If I want to sell my license, T9, to another social equity program participant, how can I do that?
It ultimately comes down to what type of license it is and whether or not it's a business entity that's licensed and you're selling your equity in that business to another social equity individual applicant, or you're planning to sell the business to another social equity individual applicant, and then that applicant plans to do an entity substitution to change the entity. I would recommend you reach out to your assigned analyst so you can discuss what your specific circumstances would be so that they can tell you what the order of operation would be to effectuate that type of change.
Our next question comes from Orlando H. Do you have a certified tax professional on staff that determines financial eligibility?
I'm not sure what the goal of the question is. We do not have any certified professional accountants or lawyers on DCR personnel. The assigned analysts do the equity share review for the legal business entities that are pursuing licenses under the social equity program based on criteria that's been established. By and large, DCR doesn't get involved in private business disputes or discussions or the drafting of legal agreements. We just look to see whether or not the agreements provided to the department comply with Municipal Code Section 10420, which of course doesn't require us to have a certified public accountant or a lawyer to do that. For other information related to the social equity program or the licensing, I would just refer you to the department's website.
Okay, we have a question from three individuals, Michaela S., Anahi T., and Jane E. What is the timeline for DCR to process CEQA forms submitted? The DCC is giving 180 days for applications to prove CEQA compliance. I'm not clear on DCR's end.
So again, this is something where you should reach out to your assigned analyst. For existing licensees, the city worked with the state, and we have basically a notice of environmental compliance form that could be provided to the state to allow the licensee to continue to renew their state provisional license while they go through the final CEQA process at the local level to get an annual license. Again, this is one of those things that ties back to the recommendation for the formal annual licensing requirements ending in the Planning and Land Use Management Committee. The city needs to formally adopt what those annual requirements are in order for us to actually apply our analysis and meet the requirements under CEQA. So there's still a few outstanding things that we need for our annual licensing process at the local level that then would give us the ability to finalize the environmental forms and then move them forward in the process. The environmental documents have to be approved in parallel with the discretionary action that is tied to that review, which happens to be the annual licensing process. So until the annual licensing process is finalized, we're not in a position as a department to finalize the environmental review documents. And again, that's another one of those things where the department has made recommendations and it's pending before the Planning and Land Use Management Committee. So hopefully that will occur later this year.
Okay, a question from Michaela S. Rather than an ownership change, I want to apply for a new license with a new entity in the currently operating location. Can I do this?
The simple answer is going to be yes. It really comes down to what the circumstances are for your current location. If you have an existing license at the location and you plan to keep that license at the location, you will have to have a distinct business premises for your new application. If you have a pending application or you're going to cancel your existing license so that your application for under the new entity at that location can move forward, that would also be an option. But licensees cannot have overlapping business premises where commercial cannabis activity is being conducted. So that's something you'll have to factor into your thought process.
Okay, Richard L is asking, I was approved for a social equity license. Now what?
If you received a commercial cannabis license and you from the city, and you also have a corresponding commercial cannabis license from the state, you would be allowed to commence operating. And then you'll just have to make sure that you operate in compliance with all state and local requirements. If you're referring to getting verified as a social equity individual applicant, that then enables you to access the business licensing and compliance assistance provided by Dr. Brown and her team, as well as the learning management system. But unless you have received a commercial cannabis license, you cannot engage in commercial cannabis activity.
Thanks, Jason. Let's see, the same question from two individuals, Richard L and Charles D. How does one apply for a grant for help to get started?
I would refer you to the department's website under the social equity program to look to see what grant opportunities may be available for your specific circumstances.
Okay, the next question from Lennet Z. Are you currently offering licenses for storefront dispensaries?
Unless you were selected through the Phase 3 Retail Round 2 lottery, DCR is not accepting new applications for the retail storefront activity.
Okay, this next question is also from Lennet. Are you allowed to sublet for delivery licensing only?
That's going to ultimately be a question for your landlord. If your landlord allows for you to sublet, then you could sublet a portion of your business premises to another prospective applicant for commercial cannabis activity. DCR does not get involved in landlord tenant agreements, so you'll have to reach out to your landlord to see whether or not that would be allowed.
Okay, Linda R is asking, when will the SE verification window reopen?
DCR's hope is to reopen it sometime in 2023. As I mentioned earlier in the Q&A, we will be making a recommendation to the Planning and Land Use Management Committee to further amend the social equity criteria with the hope of updating the language to preclude somebody from bringing additional lawsuits against the city, which could prevent applicants from having the opportunity to apply. And we will hopefully get that report out early this year.
Okay. Anthony B asks, how long is the licensing process?
It could take as little as 3 to 6 months, or it could take several years. It really depends on the applicant's readiness to navigate through the process, and then their ability to meet the local requirements as well as the state requirements.
Okay, moving on. Gina M asks, when will licenses be available for cannabis-infused food or cannabis restaurants?
So DCR, through the non-volatile manufacturing commercial cannabis license type, does offer the full non-volatile manufacturing as well as the type N, which is the infusion-based one, which would allow for the licensee to infuse food products for sale at licensed retail commercial cannabis locations. However, the city does not allow currently for on-site consumption. And again, that would be a legislative issue that the city council will have to take up before DCR has the authority to even consider the issuance of the acceptance of an application, let alone the issuance of a license on that issue.
Okay, Gina M is also asking, what are the current requirements for an indoor-outdoor establishment with food and cannabis consumption?
So currently DCR is not issuing licenses or accepting applications for on-site cannabis consumption.
Okay, Samuel M, what are you doing about illegal businesses?
So the Department of Cannabis Regulation does not have a formal role in addressing unlicensed commercial cannabis activity within the city. DCR participates in triages complaints that come through the complaint portal, and complaints that are related to applicants and licensees are reviewed by DCR. Otherwise, the complaint is forwarded to the Los Angeles Police Department for their review. DCR will verify information for agencies that are able to take action against unlicensed commercial cannabis businesses to identify or let them know whether or not a license has been issued for the location. Anybody who believes that there is unlicensed commercial cannabis activity should submit their complaint directly through the complaint portal, which is available on DCR's website. And then, you know, we'll go ahead and take a look at the address. And if it's related to one of our businesses, DCR will handle it. Otherwise, it'll be referred to LAPD.
Perfect. Next question comes from Zakia E. I would like information on getting licensed for cannabis-infused foods.
You know, DCR does accept applications for the standalone type in non-volatile manufacturing license, which would allow for the infusion. More information would be available on our website as well as on the Department of Cannabis Control's website.
Frederick H. asks, when will DCR open? All other agencies are open.
So the week of January 30th, DCR plans to reopen its public counter on Tuesday and Wednesday from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m.
Thank you. Let's see. Taylor B. and Emily H. are asking, when will the department accept new PCN requests?
We'll have to get we plan to reopen the PCN process as soon as we're able to resolve the question about the social equity verification criteria and get further direction on the administration of another lottery. So stay tuned.
Okay, Phyllis P. is asking, is there any hands-on assistance with completing the application process?
There's no hands-on assistance from the Department of Cannabis Regulation. However, social equity individual applicants may be able to get one-on-one assistance through one of our business licensing and compliance assistance vendors as part of the social equity program. Again, I would reach out to dcr.sep@lacity.org to see whether or not you would be eligible to apply for those services and what the availability of those specific services are.
Thanks. Freddie F. is asking, I need direction or info for beginners on licenses for all necessary startup needs, please.
You know, again, if you're a verified social equity individual applicant, there's a lot of information on the learning management system. And I would recommend that you log into the LMS and then access whatever information and tutorials and presentations are available there.
Okay, a second question from Eddie F. Is there a direct office where I can go and pay or apply for these beginner license fees? Thank you.
I mean, the licensing process starts through the DCR licensing portal. Once an invoice has been issued, the Office of Finance collects payment on behalf of the Department of Cannabis Regulation. So if you're issued an invoice, it'll have payment instructions on the invoice, as well as provide you with how you can pay those particular fees to the Office of Finance.
Our next question, Devin B. Recent amendments to the LA Municipal Code authorized Phase 3 applicants to relocate between community plans. However, DCR staff has stated applicants cannot relocate until February. Is this true?
So it is functionally true. The City Council and Mayor approved an amendment to the Los Angeles Municipal Code at the end of calendar year 2022. Once the proposed ordinance had been published, there's a period of time that it has to be published for before it becomes effective. So the ordinance will become effective on January 30th of 2023. The reality is the sensitive uses that DCR utilizes for making land use determinations will be updated on February 1st of 2023. So the first effective date for new records to come in and then ultimately get reviewed and processed will be for February. The critical thing for folks to remember is applicants can't submit a relocation request. So the only way an applicant would be able to relocate would be if the application record has been denied, or excuse me, not denied, but abandoned, and the abandoned record is eligible for refiling. As part of the refiling process, you would be able to submit a proposed business premises location in a community plan area that has not reached undue concentration. But again, applicants are not eligible to relocate, and licensees, the recommendation to allow licensees to relocate was not approved by the Planning and Land Use Management Committee. So more information will be coming out. I anticipate we'll do another webinar later this month just to clarify how that process is going to work mechanically, and then when people will have access to the process. Effectively, if your record is deemed abandoned, you will have the ability to refile at a business premises that is outside of your original community plan area, provided it has not reached undue concentration. So it's a little too technical for this Q&A, and we'll be doing a webinar later this month to kind of jump into more detail. But we can't even accept those requests until the law goes into effect.
Okay. Devin B asks, are applicants from phase 3, round 1, who are deemed ineligible due to sensitive use now be able to reapply, and will DCR reach out to those applicants?
Again, this is another one of the recommendations that DCR made in its report that has not moved out of the Planning and Land Use Management Committee. So unfortunately, unless or until that recommendation moves out of committee and gets adopted by the mayor and city council, DCR is not in a position to allow for those folks to come back into the process.
Okay. Jeremiah W., can you review with us any changes and outcomes that were made in your recommendations to the City Council's most recent meetings, please?
So DCR transmitted a report with over 20 recommendations that was pending before the Planning and Land Use Management Committee. When the report came up for its hearing, 1.5 of the recommendations got moved out of committee. One recommendation that was moved was we proposed allowing social equity individual applicants to aggregate their equity share interest in the applicant or licensee to meet the 51% ownership requirement. So that was a recommendation that was adopted as recommended by the department. DCR also had recommended allowing businesses to relocate out of their community plan area, provided the community plan that they're trying to move into was not subject to a finding of undue concentration. So this is the 1/2. The committee moved a portion of that recommendation to allow for applicants who have their applications deemed abandoned to effectively relocate through the refiling process, but they excluded the ability for licensees to relocate out of their community plan area if their activity, such as retail, microbusiness with on-site sales, or cultivation, were subject to undue concentration. So licensees still do not have the ability to relocate activities subject to that UC finding out of the community plan area, and only applicants who had their application deemed abandoned and are eligible to refile could basically effectuate the relocation through a refiled application. Again, it's very technical, and we'll be doing a webinar later this month to kind of go into additional detail on that. And again, there's dozens of recommendations that are still pending before the Planning and Land Use Management Committee that hopefully get moved sometime in calendar year 2023.
Okay, the next question comes from Ruth A. What is the time frame to relocate a retail license to a new location?
Again, the underlying application would have to have been deemed abandoned and have to be eligible for refiling. And then it comes down to when you choose to refile that application. We're not even going to be able to consider the pre-application review records under the amended law until the law becomes effective, which will be at the end of January.
Okay. Pharrell M asks, how many different type 10 licenses max can the lottery winners apply for?
If somebody was selected as part of the phase 3 retail round 2 lottery, their selection allows for them to apply for one retail storefront commercial cannabis license. Separately from the phase 3 retail round 2 lottery process, the code limits an individual to only owning up to 3 type 10 licenses.
All right. Pharrell M also asks, is there a limit of fee waivers or seed grants we can apply for?
Qualifying social equity individual applicants may be eligible to receive more than one grant, provided the grants are provided under different funding opportunities. Again, I would refer questions about the availability of waivers or grants to the department's website, and any specific questions about an individual's ability to qualify to dcr.sap@city.org.
Reginald W is asking, who do I contact to find out my ID number?
If you log into the DCR licensing portal under account management, it'll list your ACA reference contact ID number, which is unique to you as an individual. If you're looking for the contact information for, or the ID number for a business entity, you would just log into the business entity's ACA account to find that information. And if you're looking for a DCR record number for an application or a license you're associated with, when you log into the DCR licensing portal, you can click on My Records, and then it'll show any of the DCR records that you are associated with.
Our next question comes from Arthur A. The application shows in my individual social equity Excella login. I was told to create a new Excella for the storefront, but how do I get the application to show up in the new Excella portal or the new store Excella portal?
So if you have your individual account and you have the account for the legal business entity that's applying for the commercial cannabis license, as long as the legal business entity has been associated with the application record, and it'll appear under both your individual profile where you're listed as the owner, as well as the business entity's records that it would be associated with. If you're not seeing it under the business entity, my guess is that the business entity isn't listed as a contact on that record, and you'll need to reach out to your assigned analyst to get that resolved.
Thank you, Jason. Moving on from Arthur A. I've been waiting for more than a week to get the BTRC number so I can enter it into the entity section to complete the storefront application. How long does it take?
The Office of Finance attempts to get most of these requests resolved within 5 business days of them getting the request. But between the holiday schedule and the end of the 2022 tax year, there are some delays in processing these requests because they need to prioritize the renewal payments as well as the monthly tax remittance payments. So we try to do it within 5 days, but it could take up to 2 weeks.
Okay. Sherry M asks, is a retail applicant who was chosen in the recent lottery able to submit multiple pre-applications for more than one location at the same time or within a few days of each other? She is working against the March 31st state provisional deadline and wants to be certain she can get something in and meet sensitive use requirements.
So you can only have one pending pre-app tied to your lottery record at any given time. If DCR determines that the pre-app is ineligible due to sensitive uses or zoning requirements, once the pre-app is closed, your lottery record will allow for you to submit a new pre-application review record. If it's deemed eligible for further processing and you're unable to come to terms with the landlord or secure the location, and you could surrender your business premises, and we will basically close out the pre-application and reset your lottery record so you can submit a new location. But you can only have one open pre-application review record for the retail storefront opportunity at any given time.
Okay. Michael C. asks, as an SEIA, do I need to get verified every year?
It depends. If you got verified and you applied for and received your commercial cannabis licenses, you'll have the opportunity to continue to renew those licenses under the criteria you were approved under. But as we saw for retail round 2, generally when the criteria is changed, you have to meet the new criteria in order to apply for future application or licensing opportunities. So just like the folks that were verified in 2019 weren't immediately eligible to participate in the phase 3 retail round 2 lottery, they were only eligible to apply if they got verified under the 2022 criteria and met the criteria to participate in the lottery. If the criteria changes again and you plan to apply for activities after that date, you'll likely have to meet that criteria in order to engage. But it doesn't affect pending applications or licenses that were submitted under that the original SEIA criteria when it was in use.
Let's see, moving on from Chanel W. Can we apply for a license without the location secured?
No, you'll have to identify a proposed business premises location. You don't have to have site control, so you don't have to have an active lease or a property deed. So if that's what you mean by secured, then you can go through the pre-application review process without having a location secured or site control. However, when you do submit an application for commercial cannabis activities, you do have to provide either a lease or a property deed with your application. So it would have to be secured at that point in time.
Thanks, Jason. Damon R. asks, where do we find the local ordinances and rules for delivery businesses?
So if you go to the department's website, you'll have the ability to tap into a link to the Los Angeles Municipal Code, which will take you to the applicable municipal code sections, as well as the link to the department's rules and regulations that are published. And then it's in a OCR PDF. So you can just hit Control F and then search for delivery to find, regulations that may be specific to deliveries. But in general, most of our ordinance as well as the rules and regulations apply to all commercial cannabis activity types.
A second question from Damon R. Will a delivery applicant ever be able to obtain a retail location?
I don't know if they'll ever be able to obtain a retail location or a retail license, but there may be opportunities for delivery applicants and licensees to either apply for participation in a future lottery or through the public convenience or necessity process to pursue a commercial cannabis retail storefront license.
Okay, next question from Emily A. Do you need to have a location secured before applying for grant money? And is there still grant money available?
So for the current iteration of the seed grant program, which is providing financial assistance, you do have to have a location, and you're going to have to either provide a lease or a non-binding letter of intent. Grant money, I believe, is still available, but there are limited filing windows for each of the grants before we ensure that the grant monies are expended based on our agreement with the state. So I would recommend reaching out to the social equity team and or applying as soon as possible, because once that funding term ends, monies will be dispersed, and unfortunately you will no longer be able to apply.
Our next question from Ashley A asks, how can I see if someone is using my equity without my knowledge?
I don't know what is intended by the question. I mean, if you have equity in a business entity and that equity entitles you to profit distributions, voting rights, etc., and somebody else is using them, it would really be incumbent on you to know what your rights are and when you should be either receiving payments or engaging in voting activities. And of course, if you're not receiving profit dividends or revenue sharing or other things that other owners are, you would want to reach out to the entity to find out what was going on. DCR doesn't get involved in private business disputes. So if you do find that somebody is siphoning revenue or engaged in some criminal activity, I would either reach out to your business partners, the business entity, an attorney, or law enforcement if you believe a crime was committed.
Thank you, Jason. Our next question comes from Chris M. If an SEIA abandons his application, can he reapply as an individual or a different entity?
If a social equity application is deemed abandoned, the social equity individual applicant may initiate the refiling process, and provided there's only one social equity individual applicant, they could refile under the existing or different entity.
Okay, moving on. Jay Guevara asks, regarding social equity partnership, do you need the entity verification to obtain temporary approval? or can this be done after temporary approval has been granted?
Well, for any pending application, you'll have to meet the equity share requirements prior to the issuance of a license. If you've been issued a license and you're going through an ownership modification, then, provided at least one of the owners remains on the record, the entity can continue to utilize the license issued while DCR reviews the ownership modification request. So if you are applying, you need to meet the equity share requirements before a license has been issued. If a license has been issued, you can submit your ownership modification request and DCR will review it. And as part of that review, will ensure that the entity continues to meet the equity share requirements.
Thank you, Jason. I just wanted to mark the time for those who are joining us. It is 1:02. Did you want to continue?
I have a few more minutes. I can keep going if you're still available.
I am. I just wanted to check with you and see if you wanted to take a break or just continue.
I'm good with continuing for now and just kind of plowing through, unless you
Okay.
have another obligation.
I'm good. Thank you. So I'll move on to the next question from Jay Guevara again. Are we in the process of searching for a location? Would you advise to submit the entity verification early on?
For folks
What's
that,
that? Yeah,
for
I knew,
folks
but
that
I
have
just didn't wanted to prompt.
for folks that have already made the business decision as to how they want to pursue the license, LLC, corporation, etc. You have the ability to create your legal business entity record and then begin the equity share review while you look for a proposed business premises location that complies. You do have to have an LBER record in order to submit the pre-application if you're going to pursue it as anything other than a sole proprietor. So the earlier you get started with that and your ability to request the equity share review as part of that process would ultimately shorten the application processing period once you find a compliant location, because there's less things to do and review at that point in time.
Okay, next question from Luis R. Speaking generally, what are the current processing times for licensing and modification requests? When will expedited services be available?
So the current processing times are generally within what's articulated in the rules and regulations, with the exception of the refiling, which requires extra review to make sure that the refiled record has been refiled properly and within the same community plan area, et cetera. For the land use review, that's one of the processes that may take a little bit longer. And it really depends on when the application's submitted, when the fees are paid, and whether or not we're going through a transition with the sensitive uses, which happens on a quarterly basis. So current processing times are really going to vary service to service, and depending on whether or not the applicant or licensee has established things necessary to effectuate those changes. Modification requests are going to be one of those big ones where for folks that have gone through the 2023 renewal process, they were required to create the legal business entity record. So all ownership changes, primary personnel changes, changes to the legal entity name, etc., all have to go through the legal business entity record. So if you haven't created your record yet, you're not even going to be able to submit the modification request. And for expedited services, that'll be made available, I anticipate, sometime later in 2023. We're aggressively engaged in trying to fill our vacancies. We're about 10 or 11 positions away from falling below the 20% vacancy rate, which then kicks in the mandatory processing times. Once we've got staff trained up and we are processing everything within those required processing times, that would be the time at which we may make the expedited services available again.
Okay, we have a second question from Luis R. When will the storefront retail, including PCN and indoor cultivation licensing application processes be available?
So there's the one big thing going on there is, whether or not there's going to be any amendments to the social equity criteria. And then from there, it's determining for the retail storefront capacity. DCR has the discretion to conduct lotteries to make those application opportunities available. There may be a recommendation to establish the pathway for the remaining cultivation application opportunities to be made available through a lottery as well. And then, of course, PCN is only for community plan areas that have reached undue concentration. Again, there's going to be a few recommendations that will be before the city council that we would like to get clarity on before we make those processes available, but I'm hopeful that we'll be able to administer those processes later in 2023.
Thank you, Jason. Esther R. has a question. What are the biggest pitfalls in years 1 through 3 of operations?
I think it's going to vary activity by activity and whether or not you're vertically integrated or you're reliant on other licensees to either sell inventory to or to receive inventory from. Dr. Brown and her team have done a number of workshops where licensees and other stakeholders have come out to explain some of these pitfalls. Like, off the top of my head, one of the biggest pitfalls is just access to capital and then being able to start up the business and getting it operating so that you generate revenue in the absence of being able to raise capital in a traditional fashion. The ability to secure a location with the knowledge that licenses can't be transferred, and if you have to move, you have to submit a new application for that, is another one of those pitfalls where you may have to stop operating for an unknown period of time because you and the landlord get into a dispute. And then, of course, ownership related conflicts that may result in litigation are also pitfalls that have kind of reared up over the last 3 to 5 years.
Frank R. has a question regarding delivery. If I applied for a delivery license, would I only be allowed to deliver in the city of Los Angeles or anywhere in the state?
So if you receive the city and state delivery license, you are able to deliver to jurisdictions outside of the city of Los Angeles.
Okay, that was quick. Frank R. Has a question. Is a warehouse that has multiple companies in it okay for an address for delivery?
Provided that where the commercial cannabis activity will be conducted is separate and apart from the other companies, it could be compliant and it could be considered by the department.
Michael B asks, when is a medium-sized cultivation going to be available for social equity applicants?
I would stay tuned to see whether or not that capacity will be administered through a lottery. Hopefully that'll be resolved early this year.
Okay. Michael B also asks, are there going to be any banks that are going to back social equity applicants for funding?
I'm not sure about the reach of the question, but there are credit unions that allow cannabis businesses to, one, bank with them, and two, apply for business loans. A lot of the major banks have separate requirements for commercial cannabis businesses, and the business's ability to meet those specific requirements can be very daunting. Ultimately, the banking and everything else is a federal matter, and DCR and the city really don't have a direct control over it.
I'm sorry, let me try that again. How can I get funding from my business? Asked Timothy W.
I mean, if you're a social equity applicant, I would recommend going to the learning management system to see about how other businesses raise capital to operate their business. Or, unfortunately, DCR does not provide business advice through the seed grant program and some of the LMS modules. You may be able to find out about grant funded opportunities as well as how to raise capital how to do capital fundraising.
The next question comes from Dana C. Will public hearings be required for annual approval as in rules and regulations 3.g? We have renewals coming up with DCC and no path to an annual license or full approval.
So as depending on the commercial cannabis activity type, a public hearing may be required. For retail storefronts, once the annual application is deemed complete, that then triggers mandatory processing timeframes for things such as announcing a public hearing and making a recommendation to the first level decision maker. Again, this is one of those matters where DCR recommended to the city council solidifying what the annual application process is going to be so that we know what is required to deem the application complete, including the public health permits and the fire permits and the building permits, the certificate of occupancy, everything else that would be necessary to demonstrate that you couldn't engage on an ongoing basis at the location for that specific commercial cannabis activity. And until that issue is resolved, we don't have the ability to deem an annual application complete, let alone issue an annual license. So again, the dual licensing nature and the DCC's requirements and their requirements not necessarily aligning with the legislative realities at the local level could pose a problem for existing licensees after 2024 when the state phases out their provisional licensing process. But we have made recommendations. We as a department do want to move forward as quickly as possible, but we do need additional assistance from the city council to move some of these recommendations forward to help our licensees.
Okay, question from Jonathan O. Will the state be addressing the use of harmful chemicals in product destruction? Will composting be allowed?
That's a great question for the state. At the city level, you can reach out to the Department of Public Works, Bureau of Sanitation. They can provide you guidance on whether or not your treated cannabis products are considered contaminated or considered green waste. And then, of course, they have authorized waste haulers who could facilitate hazardous waste removal and or the green waste removal.
Thank you, Jason. Our next question comes from Jesse F. How far down this list does an applicant need to get in order to beat the provisional license deadline? And this is the list. Register for the BTRC, 2, legal business entity record, 3, pre-application review, 4, temporary approval application, 5, environmental review, 6, determination of completeness, and 7, annual application. If you need me to repeat that, Jason, I can.
So there's two pieces to this. The state's provisional license application process is separate and apart from the city. So you only have until March 31st, 2023 to submit a new social equity application for a provisional license to the state. And you can do that at any time without having met any of those steps. Now, as the state is processing that provisional license application, they will reach out to the city to find out whether or not the applicant has a status of local compliance underway for that specific activity. So in order to be issued a provisional license, you'll have to meet the application deadline of March 31st, 2023, as well as have submitted a temporary approval application that made it to local compliance underway prior to June 30th, 2023.
Thank you, Jason. A question from EBH. Is DCR expediting the review process in any way for SEI applicants providing the impending March 31st state deadline?
The simple answer is yes. The director and then Dr. Brown and her team have identified grant funding to provide fee waivers to social equity individual applicants selected through the Phase 3 Retail Round 2 lottery to provide the fee waivers for the legal business entity record, equity share review, the pre-application review record, as well as the temporary approval application fees, which expedites DCR's ability to consider those records and then start moving them forward, because you don't have to wait to remit payment to the Office of Finance, and then DCR can go ahead and get a jump on processing. We are doing our best to prioritize, to the extent possible, any of the Phase 3 Retail Round 2 pre-application review records that are coming in.
Thank you. Arat is asking, do we need to wait for the state annual to apply for the city annual?
The answer is no. In order to meet the state's annual application requirement, you will most likely have to receive a city annual license, because the state does require a final environmental review or documentation of that environmental analysis, which isn't considered finalized until the discretionary action tied to it is actually, finalized. So it's, you need the city annual before you're going to meet the requirements for the state annual.
Rick H is asking, I have a type 9 delivery license and my landlord wants me to leave my place next month when my contract expires. I'm unable to acquire a different space. Can I keep my license until I find a property?
If you timely renewed your license for 2023, when you no longer have site control, you'll have to surrender your business premises location. There's a period of time that the code provides where a license can be non-operational before it's either denied, canceled, revoked, etc. So you will have to find a compliant location. One of the recommendations that's still pending in the Planning and Land Use Management Committee was a recommendation to allow for the prior licensee to refile for a license that has expired within the last 3 years, knowing that people have licenses and they may lose site control or they may have operational issues that require them to shut down for a period of time where they can't utilize the license, is a reality. And we have proposed a solution that would allow for a license to become non-operational or expire, and then allow for that entity to come back into the process when they're ready to move forward with a new application or at a new location. Again, that's a pending recommendation, and it's in the Planning and Land Use Management Committee. So for now, you will have to notify us when you lose site control, and you may or may not find a new compliant location before your license either expires or DCR has the discretion to either deny your application or revoke the license.
Okay, our next question was submitted anonymously. Will additional PCNs be granted before all such social equity licenses have been approved with their respective locations secured?
So, I mean, that's going to be completely a policy question because the public convenience or necessity process is only available in areas that have reached undue concentration, which means DCR has issued a sufficient number of commercial cannabis cultivation or retail storefront licenses to trigger that finding. And then once a community plan area is unduly concentrated, DCR does not have the authority to accept or process an application unless or until the city council makes a finding of public convenience or necessity. So again, the community plan areas that have reached undue concentration could allow for the submission of a PCN request, but DCR has no idea whether or not the city council would actually make the necessary findings to allow for somebody to submit an application.
Okay, the next question was submitted by Bishop, and Bishop asks, excuse me, does a sole proprietor need to receive a BTRC master account prior to submitting a pre-app?
Yes.
And then the same question, or a different question from the same individual. At what point is DCR triggered to do an equity share review for a temporary approval application that has been submitted? Does the applicant need to ask for this? Is it something DCR automatically does? Yeah, that's the question.
So that's a more complicated question. For records that were submitted prior to the creation of the legal business entity record, DCR did the equity share review after the application record got a status of local compliance underway. which means that all of the necessary documents and forms had been submitted for us to do the review. And then the equity share review would be done in parallel with the request for initial inspection. It's something where the applicant's ability to get DCR information kind of triggers how quickly the equity share review is done. For newer records where a legal business entity record is submitted, the prospective applicant has the ability to request the equity share review on that record, separate and apart from the application. And the goal there is to do the equity share review outside of the application process. So it reduces the application processing time where somebody may have sunk cost or holding costs associated with the location where they're pursuing licensure. My guess is the biz shop has specific records that they may be interested in asking about, and I would recommend that they email DCR licensing with those records so that we can find out where those individual reviews are.
Okay, just wanted to note the time, we're at 1:27, and I think you could stay till 1:30, so I'll go ahead and ask the next one.
Okay, thank you.
DJ asks, is the fee waiver grant still available? And if so, for delivery as well?
DCR does not have any fee waiver grant monies for delivery at this time.
Okay. Jesse F asks, is it possible to apply for a pre-application review on a property you plan to apply for a PCN with, if the CPA has already hit undue concentration?
When DCR announces the reopening of the PCN process, then and only then will you be able to submit a pre-app review record for a property in a community plan subject to undue concentration.
I think we can squeeze in one more maybe. Anahi asks, I have 3 state applications that have been pending since August because they are waiting on secret determination. She is not an SEP. When will determinations be issued for annual licensing? I understand it is Plum, but how long will it take?
The CEQA determination that the state wants for their annual process requires the city to have issued an annual city license. So unfortunately, your CEQA determination can't be finalized until DCR has made the recommendation to issue an annual license, and then that determination has been adopted by the first level decision maker, and it survives any appeals that may be made against either the environmental analysis or the issuance of the annual license. And unfortunately, right now, I don't know how long it's going to take, or if our recommendations are going to move out of the Planning and Land Use Management Committee.
Okay, Jason, we have hit the 1:30 mark. We do have one question, but I'm not sure how you are on time.
I can do one more question.
Okay. DJ is asking, fee waiver. Oh, I think I lost that question. I think we're good.
Again, we've got, assuming the fee waiver question, we've got grant monies for fee waivers for the 100 individuals selected to participate in the phase 3 retail round 2 lottery process. But I don't have a bucket of grant monies for fee waivers associated with non-storefront delivery or any other application record type.
Great. Thank you, Jason.
You're very welcome. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in for the first Q&A session of 2023. Again, we will be doing a separate webinar to talk about the relocation process for applicants that have their records deemed abandoned that are eligible to refile, which would allow for them to refile in a new community plan area. That'll be done later this month. I don't have the date for the next Q&A session, but we will be doing another Q&A. And then I believe that as we kind of move forward with the implementation of some of the recommendations or updates to the rules and regulations this year, we'll be doing targeted either Q&A sessions or webinars to discuss those activities. So with that, thank you for tuning in this afternoon. I hope everybody's having a great new year, and I look forward to working with everybody again later. Goodbye.